thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Carrie Ospey. If you can't understand me because I have cloth across my face or I'm talking too fast or not loud enough, let me know. I am going to be taking over the third Sunday forums now from Eileen Lambs, which is huge shoes to fill. So thank you so much for everything and your confidence in me for doing that, and ably with the help of Kathy and Pastor Kirkland too, because I can't do this alone. So I appreciate it. Just some housekeeping. Next month, August 21st, for the third Sunday forum, will be the artist Ricardo Levins Morales, whose artwork you see upstairs, will be joining us for the third Sunday forum. Is there anything else I need to announce before we begin? Okay. Well, today I'd like to welcome Ryan Lynn, librarian at Rochester Public Library. He's in the reference department. And Allison Carpenter, the GPS social worker at Rochester Public Library. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn it right over to them. If anybody is joining us online via Zoom, I do have the chat open on my phone, and I can help pick up any questions we have later.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. And let us know if there are video or audio issues. Thanks for having us. And I have to say, this is the first Zoom meeting I've ever been in where one of the participants was labeled as Christ. So that's kind of awesome. Allison and I can do just a brief presentation, just a slide, just kind of give you some background. And then we would love to have a conversation and take questions after we do that. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here. Allison, anything you want to add before we get started?
No.
Okay, so, all right. So hopefully you see the slides. Okay, so library and social work, maybe not necessarily the first combination you think put together, but it really fits in with a lot of things that the library already provides, even just in its traditional mission. I mean, we're a place where anybody can come in and feel safe. We have access to lots of materials, certain things like the internet, books, all sorts of wonderful things. We're a place people can hang out during the day, whether the weather is super, super hot, whether it's incredibly cold, or anywhere in between. That's a good place for people, they can spend a lot of time here, and it's perfectly okay. One thing I think people probably underestimate a little bit is the social aspect of the library. A lot of people come to meet and just hang out. People don't just study or do so that. People come out and hang out, which we love. And another thing that's different from the library and a lot of other things in town is, especially now in our post-COVID hours, or post-pre-COVID, whatever that is, we now are open expanded weekend hours. We used to only be open a very limited amount of hours, especially in the summer, but at the current time, we actually are open Saturdays and Sundays from 10 to 6, which is very different than a lot of other institutions in the city and throughout the county. So we've always been a place that has lots of different resources, and some that you may or may not be aware of. Actually, Carrie is one of the primary instigators of the seed library, which have a little plants that people can check out seeds in the spring and plant them. A lot of them are starting to come up now. We do have bikes also that people can check out. In addition, and we also have connected Chromebooks, which we just had a big government grant of 1,000 Chromebooks that have internet built into them. So those are things that anybody can come in and use, and especially with the connected Chromebooks, they are targeted to folks that have the highest needs. So there's a little bit of a threshold for those. But those are things that are just part of our mission, to have materials like that in addition to the traditional library resources. So this is kind of a transition. When COVID shut down the library in most of the country and the world, when we started getting back into that, the library was summoned as part of the Emergency Operations Center. So some library staff were taken over to Mayo Civic Center, where they had a day center that they kind of made up, and it worked really well for people that didn't have a place to stay during the daytime. Find a place for shelter, a lot of snacks, and just kind of a place to hang out that had a lot of room and a lot of distance for folks who didn't have another place to go. So the library helped staff that. So that was kind of, in some ways, kind of dipping our toe into this sort of work and helping folks that really need a lot of help. And one thing we discovered, not to anyone's surprise, is that a lot of people that were at the Mayo Day Center were regular library folks that we already knew. That would come and use the internet or hang out or whatnot. Not all of them, certainly, but quite a few. So we were familiar faces to them, at least behind our masks, and vice versa. So it was really a way that we were able to connect a little bit more with some of the folks that we maybe not normally wouldn't have spent as much time with during regular library times. So we do run into difficulties when we have folks who have maybe more, you don't have all the resources that they need to provide. I mean, we're library staff, we are not social service professionals, so we don't have that training, we don't have that background, and we don't have that connection to resources. We're also, because of our mission of helping people find resources and other things, as much as we would love to, sometimes we can't spend an hour or two or more with folks at a time. We've got so many different other things that are really our primary purposes. That's not something a library staff is able to do during a normal time. So that's kind of, even before COVID, we were looking at finding some sort of a social work, get a social worker into the library. COVID slowed things down. Fortunately, after COVID, it came more to fruition. This is not a new thing. This is not an idea that we just came up with all of a sudden. This is actually a trend in public libraries. There's a map up here. I don't know how well you can see it on the PowerPoint. But this would have looked different even a year ago. There'd be far fewer social workers here. So I just took this fairly recently, this shot, and there are 60 libraries, including the Hennepin system and St. Paul systems in Minnesota, that have social workers who are part of the staff who work right out of the libraries. And there are other ones who host social workers who aren't necessarily library staff technically, but are there doing the job. So it's really a place that people can connect. It's really a place where a lot of people who need the help find themselves, whether they're going there specifically for social work or not. So and actually there's another thing too that we had done before we're lucky enough to have Allison work for us. We have an area called the Wellness Corner in the library. It's kind of a catch-all for a lot of the more service-oriented, more social service-oriented things the library has offered. In addition to that, right now it's Allison's office. She'll talk a little bit more about that when I turn it over to you, Allison. But it's also been a place where we've had partners in the community workforce centers been there to help people find jobs, work on resumes, whatnot. We have had student nurses from Winona State and RCTC do some kind of basic health checks for people. We've also hosted things for senior citizens to write basic wills. We have some legal folks that volunteer and do that. And also in the pre-COVID times, and hopefully maybe next tax season, we've had some of the United Way volunteer tax folks there to help people. So it's not as if this is a completely different thing. We've been doing things kind of around the areas, but social work is certainly a new, something new that we have not done before for this program. There's Allison in her office. Actually, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Well, I'm Allison Carpenter. I am a Family Service Rochester employee, actually, but coordinated or contracted with the library to provide services there. Looks like a little bit of our writing here is kind of a little funky, but that's okay. Basically, just talking about my background, that I've been a social worker in the Rochester community for about 12 years. My primary experience up until coming to the library has been a bit different than what I'm doing now. So I came from another nonprofit in town working with families and children, many of which were very low income, doing a lot on very little. It was a child abuse prevention program that I oversaw. So this has been a unique transition, and I've really enjoyed it. And I've been on board since the end of November of last year. And so just kind of a little bit about my role. As Brian kind of alluded to, the library is a place where people come to seek information and gain connection and community. And I think what's interesting to note about libraries is, that, but then also it draws such a unique subset of people who have really high needs, because it is such a welcoming place and people can stay for as long as they care to stay during the day, and it doesn't cost anything to be there. And so you can imagine that that can sometimes bring a unique subset of people with a unique set of needs. And coming for information and coming for connection, it's kind of pushed the librarians and the library staff's scope a little bit wider and a little bit wider and a little bit wider until they kind of find themselves, and I don't think that's unique to Rochester, it's across the country, find themselves kind of operating a little bit outside of their scope of what they intended to be doing with their days when they went into library work. And so that scope kind of then bleeds into what looks like social work. So it's coming for information and connection to resources having to do with housing, food, rent assistance, other basic needs and that sort of thing, maybe chemical dependency support. And that's where I come in. So I see a lot of people, I'd say like if I were to kind of put it into a pie chart, the biggest piece of the pie are people experiencing homelessness and looking to just kind of figure out what the next day is going to look like, whether it's connecting with food or maybe a longer goal of getting into housing, maybe realizing that they need to work on chemical dependency issues first or mental health concerns first. And my role then is to connect them with those resources that can help that. So what was kind of explained to me when I started that I think is really helpful to know about my role is my role isn't to provide the service. So I'm not necessarily providing the mental health services or the, I'm not giving people meals. I'm not, that sort of thing, but I'm connecting them to the resources that will help that to meet those needs. Because it's a confusing and complicated social service system out there, and sometimes people need help navigating it. But something that's unique about library social work too is that it feels like a much more neutral location than, say, like going to the county for certain services. And so there's less of a stigma to come to the library to talk with a social worker and find out what kind of resources are out there than it might feel for somebody who doesn't necessarily want to go to the county. So maybe just some quick examples to kind of give you like the spectrum of people that I've seen over the last 8 months or so. And it is kind of hard to put it in a spectrum because every situation is so different, but there's, I kind of preparing for this was trying to think of like, who fits that like sort of into that category of experiencing homelessness and trying to put some pieces together to better his situation, and who fits that case of like just your average person that maybe like any of you might be friends with or find yourself in that situation, and it's just it's anything and everything. So an example would be somebody came in to work on housing applications with me. He'd been staying at a like a transitional housing type of a program that gave him support on staying clean and sober. He'd been in prison for many years, so life skills as far as like using the computer or reading and writing, just like simple things like reading and writing, were just really overwhelming for him and kind of outside what he felt comfortable with. And so he found the housing applications to be really, really complicated, and he was finding that he was just struggling to get them done. So he was super responsible and printed them all off and brought them into my office and said, "Here, help me." Like, I was like, "Okay, do you want me to do the writing or do you want to do the writing?" He's like, "I want you to do the writing. I'll tell you the answers and you do the writing. That's why I'm not doing it, because it's overwhelming." Okay. So we did like pages and pages of housing applications for him, and I helped him figure out how to turn him in, and that was a few months ago, and as far as I know, he's still waiting. He's hard to house because of his criminal record. And that's the case for so many people that I see. They've made mistakes in the past. They've done their time in prison or jail, and they're still kind of almost being punished for what they've already paid their time for because nobody will house them. So that's tough, but I can, in the meantime, be, a caring person for him to come chat with and work on things with. Another example would be a woman who was middle income, like worked all her life, never really needed any help from anybody or any agency or anything like that. But then her friend, who she had lived with for many, many years, and they shared expenses, passed away. And she was shouldering all the financial responsibilities that she and her friend had shared. And she found herself really struggling financially over the course of a couple years, when it got to the point that she was seeing that she was like down to like pennies, and wasn't exactly sure how she was going to continue to buy groceries for herself. She reached out for help, and we filled out financial assistance forms together. So when she came to see me, she actually like kind of told me what the situation was. She did so through tears. Like she was just, I think it was a surreal moment for her in her life that it had come to that, and that those words were coming out of her mouth that like, I need to apply for county assistance and I don't know how to do it. And it's really hard. And can you help me do that? And so like, it was hard enough for her to come to me at the library to do that. I think it would have been probably more than she could even, like a bigger pill than she could swallow to go do the same thing at the county, just because of the stigma with that. But she was able to get financial assistance and, keep afloat. And she's come back to see me to kind of give an update on her life since then. And things are, still stretched thin, still tough, but she's doing it because of the resources that I was able to help her connect with. And she thanked me for not being judgmental and for being, warm and caring, because I think that was her fear, was that somebody was going to judge her because she was judging herself so harshly. So, I mean, I never know who's going to walk in my door. People just walk in a million miles an hour sometimes and sit down and say, okay, here's what I need to do. Like, well, that wasn't what I thought my afternoon was going to be, but I know better than to actually plan what my days are going to be, because that's never how it plays out. Trying to think if there's anything else that might be of interest to you, but hopefully we can open up to questions. Or Brian, is there any other?
See, I just flipped to the last slide here.
Okay, yeah. So to kind of give you an idea of like number of people that I'm seeing, in the first 6 months that I have been in the wellness corner, we saw 65 unique individuals, and people come back more than once quite often. Some people only come once, some people come multiple times, so 115 individual visits in my office there. Something else too, providing support to staff. It is tricky to know just where to start with people sometimes, and I'm not there all the time to intervene, and so sometimes staff can kind of bounce things off of me, and I can provide support in that way. Social workers have a unique perspective, so I'm always kind of trying to come at things with leading, helping people to see other people's strengths first and really work with their strengths. That's a huge social work perspective kind of a thing. And just connecting people to those resources that are out there in the community.
Let's see. I think I'm just going to go ahead and stop our slides here, and we can kind of open it up.
Sure.
Questions here. And one thing before we get started with that, I just want to, just kind of building on what Allison said. There are a lot of similarities between library work and social work, but they're not the same thing. We're a big Venn diagram. We have a lot that's in common, but some that's different. And one thing that I've learned from Allison is that it's actually similar to libraries. Just an example, I had somebody who came in right before closing and wanted to get a bus ticket back to, I can't remember what city it was Austin or somewhere that it wasn't local. It was somewhere there was a longer bus ticket and wanted help doing that. And it was just a few minutes to closing. Allison had gone for the day. But what I realized is while that's what they think they want, what they really needed that day was a place to spend the night. It was a place, a local place for them to have shelter. So, I mean, not that I never would have thought of that on my own, but with Allison, it's easier to make that leap. I mean, just even though somebody's asking for A, what they really might need might be B. So it's very helpful to have her perspective to help us with situations like that, kind of outside of the regular library world. So we got him a place that he could stay for a night, and then he could, try to resolve that transportation issue another day. But at that time, I think it was even a Sunday night. So it was like nothing, there was going to be nothing available for him to do what he wanted to do primarily. So getting him that, getting him to shelter for the night was the important thing. So Carrie, do you want to moderate, or how do we want to work this for our conversation?
Moderate. I can start by seeing if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, I have some icebreakers.
I'm interested in the account of having to fill out so many papers for housing. How coordinated are the various organizations and groups working on housing to have a uniform form that is used for helping persons who need housing? I mean, how can it be less complicated is what I'm really asking.
Good question. So let me just make sure I heard that. Okay, so the question was how coordinated are places and kind of working together and having like a uniform process? Is that right?
Yeah.
So the individual apartment complexes have their own application, and I would say they're not coordinated at all. Some of those applications that man and I filled out, some were like upwards of 20 pages long. Others were 1 page. So they're really different, and that might have to do with some being government subsidized, and so the government's going to be collecting different data versus somebody who just like owns a sixplex or whatever. So they're really different from each other. There is something called the coordinated entry system, and that's very coordinated. Obviously, coordinated entry, it's in the name. And I would say the agencies that are working on housing people, there's many of them, and they're all working towards the same goal, and maybe have some other extra like things that they do outside of housing. So they're not the exact same agency, but they're all working towards the same or similar goals. And so what coordinated entry system is that's one, like a scoring tool that they'll do. So like Salvation Army, for example, will sit down with people and do coordinated entry assessment. Three Rivers Community Action. I'm trying to think of other. Salvation Army. There's a program with the county called ECHO. They'll do it too. And so it's a scoring system where they're asking people, where did you stay last night? Basically is what it's coming down to, is like, how homeless are you? Were you actually sleeping on the street, or are you couch hopping and staying with friends and family? And so it's prioritizing people. And so then when different apartment complexes that are government subsidized have an opening, which is not super often, because once you're in there, people tend to stay, but there's evictions, there's people who are moving to different communities, whatever, when there's an opening, then the complex will pull from the coordinated entry list. So the person who ranks the highest then their name will be pulled and asked if they still need a place, and then they'll move in. So that part's very coordinated. very uniform. But then of course, then if they have an opening, if like apartment complex A has an opening, then that person has to fill out their paperwork, and it might be completely different than if housing complex B had the opening and they were going to fill out their paperwork. They're individual businesses, so they're not necessarily trying to like do things the exact same. But it would be nice if people only had to fill out one application and it like spanned across all the different agencies. That's a good question. I guess I've never even thought of that. I'm just used to being kind of handed a bucket of a mess, and I don't even think about how to fix it. I just think about how do we go from here.
My name is Tony King-Fellow, and I think that I've connected with you in the past about the Patient Advocate Foundation resources, but you work with my daughter too. So, okay. So I just wanted to mention, when you're talking about housing, it's really difficult in our community to find shelter if you have an active addiction and you're under the influence of drugs. And then also with that criminal history. And so I don't want it to sound like, you know, there's these apartment complexes and you fill out these applications. There's some real true deep-rooted issues that prevent people from being able to get through a door. And it's not solved easily. I'm so happy that you are at the library. I think this is a great program. Wonderful, wonderful work that you're doing. My question to you is, how often do you work with people that are undocumented, that are very fearful of trying to seek assistance and being visible within the social service system that we have in place in the US?
That's also a really great question. So how often do I work with undocumented people who are fearful of seeking services? You know, I honestly, I'm trying to think back if there's anybody who I've even known was undocumented. I don't think I have seen a single undocumented person that was to my knowledge undocumented. I mean, not everybody, obviously, we're talking about employment or their status, their legal status here. So there could be some flying under the radar that I don't know, but that might honestly point to the need for outreach to those populations. And that's a really good point that I mean, this is such a new role that, and I've stayed quite busy. Like I'm not even quite thinking about the need for outreach because I have to then do that work. And in 30 hours a week, that's a lot.
We need a few more Allisons to be able to.
Right, exactly. But just, you know, saying that I haven't seen them, I don't think that by any means that they're not there or that they are not kind of wanting to reach out for help, but like you say, are fearful. I think that points to that we're not reaching them because they're out there. And in my previous work, there were plenty of people who were undocumented because I helped or oversaw a program that helped parents find emergency childcare. And oftentimes that was for while they were going to work, and undocumented people work. And they need safe childcare while they do that. And so that was very much a thing that we did see undocumented people, and it was fearful. Like sometimes they wouldn't want to sign the paperwork because they didn't want a paper trail. And then you figure out how to kind of circ the system and do it anyway, because they need to keep their kids safe and they need to earn a living one way or another. Social workers are not interested in feeding people to law enforcement, like feeding them in that direction. Like we're not police. We'll utilize the police as we need to, but we're not trying to get people in trouble. We're trying to help people survive, and people survive in any way that they know how to. Any of us would do that.
Librarians to handle situations where you are not in the library?
Sorry, Carrie, can you?
Yeah, we could do that.
Do you train the librarians to handle situations when you're not in the library?
You know, I honestly would like to get to a point where I could do that more. There's so much to getting kind of a new position up and going, and you know, thinking of all those things, and then figuring out how to implement them, and then doing it in between walk-ins, and still trying to keep within my 30 hours. So in a perfect world, yes, I think that would be excellent if we could almost take, like, you know, have library staff do like a survey, like a starting point survey, and then, you know, have support that I could kind of put my 2 cents into, and take another survey and just see how people's like comfort level grows. But also I want to say how much the library staff do in that realm of things already, and do so well, and like have a bigger comfort level with it probably even than I do. I mean, when I come into those kinds of situations, I'm just seeing that person as a person who's struggling and having a bad day. So that reduces my, like, you know, intimidation factor about it. But the library staff are already way more pros at doing that kind of thing than I am, because they've been doing it since the beginning. But yeah, to kind of put the social work perspective spin on it, I would love to be able to do that more.
And Allison's underselling herself a little bit here. She actually has done some training with, she's had some conversations with staff via chat or whatnot, personal interactions, but she's also coordinated several training things, including an upcoming one where she has really good connections with outside resources. Occasionally, which is very sad and very stressful, people do come to the library with suicidal ideation. They're saying that they're going to kill themselves. Or, I mean, I hate to bring down with a really sad topic, but when staff runs into that, we came to Allison and said, is there something we can do to, you know, help us with situations like that? So she's actually arranging a training with an outside source. She also brought in somebody to help us empathize. She did an empathy exercise for people, for women experiencing homelessness, and just kind of what that situation is. So she's actually done quite a bit, even if it's not one-to-one training on this. And she's also helped, there's a committee that we have called the Fresh Start Committee. If people do something for whatever their behavior or something makes us tell them not to come to the library for a certain amount of time, it's kind of like an appeal process. And Allison has jumped in on that committee and has really helped us, I think, talk through the circumstances of the folks who are up for a fresh start, and I think has given some really good guidance. So I think she's done more than she initially said. But yes, that being said, we'd love to have her for 80 hours and train all staff at the same time, but that's not going to happen.
Thanks, Brian.
On any given day, if there's a family that comes in that's hungry, immediately hungry, what's your go-to?
If they can get to Channel 1, Channel 1 would be a good bet if they have a home, because that would, you know, you can get a boatload of groceries, but if you don't have anywhere to store it, that doesn't help you too much. Salvation Army is within walking distance from the library. If I say if you can get to Channel 1, because it's way out there, it's not in a convenient location at all. Salvation Army is within walking distance. If it's a family experiencing homelessness, Family Promise would be a great avenue to try, although they oftentimes have a wait list. But they will shelter people at night and connect with resources. The immediate need there sounds like food. So getting, even a loaf of bread and peanut butter. And another question then would be if they're experiencing homelessness or not. So how much food can we get our hands on? Or is it just to kind of piece things together till the next day?
Do you use the United Way 211 number to help people with different needs?
I have, when I'm really stumped on what's out there, I have. More often than not, if I'm stumped on it during a time when my coworkers, there's 2 other GPS social workers who are based out of the county. So they're also Family Service Rochester employees, but they're contracted with the county. So their offices are there. I'll reach out to them just because, one of the 2 has done this for years and years and years. So she's going to know right off the bat. Whereas when I've used 211 before, it's helpful, especially when I don't have any other options to try to figure something out. But they're not necessarily local. And so their knowledge is limited to this database, which is great, but there's nuances to like all the programs. And so somebody who has local knowledge is even more helpful. But yeah, I've definitely used 211 when I'm in a pickle and don't quite know what to do with somebody.
And one thing I think that the difference between Allison and not necessarily 211 and just having like a community resource book, maybe some of you may be familiar. There's a little green book that comes out every year that has a lot of different kinds of resources. I mean, it's great to have those to give to people, but you don't have someone like Allison who knows the system, who knows it's like, oh, if you get there early on this day, they're going to have a lot of food or whatever, just kind of more background rather than just giving them a naked phone number and they take their chances.
Yeah.
So that's one advantage to having Allison with us. She has a lot more of those connections and knowledge than we do as library staff.
And if you've ever been just completely overwhelmed in your life and you're handed one more thing to do, like that in itself is like, well, who cares? Like I can't even do one more thing. And so I think the benefit also of having me on board is like, if they're just even too overwhelmed to make that phone call on their own, we can do it together. Or, maybe the fear is when the person on the other end of the line picks up that the answer is going to be no, and they just can't even stomach that. Well, making the phone call together can sometimes soften the challenge that's there. Like, well, okay, if the answer is no, then I have some other ideas that we can try. Just so people don't have to do it alone. Like you don't have to do it alone. I can help.
Allison, just some feedback that I've been getting with the people that are doing that community outreach. And this is kind of a challenge to churches in our community, are that in the past, a lot of churches, you know where to go if you needed a gas card, or you know where to go if you needed certain specific things. But more and more, a lot of people that are doing that outreach are hearing, we're going to help members of our church and we're not going to help beyond that. Is that anything that you're running into where, if the reliance on churches in the past, now a lot are saying that they're not going to help us with the members?
So, Carrie, I only picked up pieces of that. Can you help summarize a little bit?
That we're running into often, churches historically have helped a lot with social things. And we were wondering though, what we're hearing is some churches have been pulling back and instead of helping anybody, are only going to help a member. Have you been running into that when trying to find resources that if you reach out and it's a church that they may say, I'm sorry, we're only going to help members of our congregation?
I have not. I guess kind of like the tier of like what I think about first is usually like non-faith-based agencies I think about, because a lot of times there's case management involved. So it's great to help kind of do the one and done if that's all that's needed. But a lot of times, some case management might be beneficial. So I might try to plug somebody into an agency that then's going to have a social worker who's going to have their eye on somebody, or somebody that they can come back to more than once if they need. Then if there's nothing really that fits that bill as far as an agency, then I'll kind of dig into reaching out to different churches. Quite often then I would start with St. Vincent de Paul, just because they're so coordinated amongst themselves. And like they're there so people can reach out to them. And then beyond that, sometimes I'll say, all right, well, I would just say make some phone calls to some local churches, and a lot of times just give that to the person to do themselves, because there's a lot of churches in town, and I don't know what their answers are going to be. It's kind of almost like if I get to that point, I'm taking a shot in the dark. And sometimes make those phone calls together with the person, but I don't often, maybe that's an underutilized resource that I'm not tapping into enough, but I guess what I'm saying is that I don't get to that point where I'm just calling kind of like random, churches to try to fill the need. So no, I haven't run into that. But also what I'm wondering is maybe that is an underutilized, maybe there's a goal of mine of churches that would say yes. But I guess what you're saying is that a lot of times resources are stretched thin among churches, and they're saying no unless they're part of their congregation as it is.
Another question. So, as far as the outreach, how do people know that the service is available at the library?
A lot of it seems to be word of mouth. So I'll say a couple things. Early on, there was a lot of news coverage. Like, I was surprised by the amount of press that my role got, and honestly I was a little intimidated. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm starting a new job, and like, yeah, okay, fine, KTTC. And people were coming to me saying that they saw my story on the news, or heard it on NPR. But a lot of people that I serve don't have TVs because they don't have a home. And so they, didn't see it on the news, but the person that they were staying at the warming shelter told them about it, or the person that they sat next to at lunch at the Salvation Army told them about it. So a lot of people that I see, the people experiencing homelessness, it is very much a community, and they all know each other. And I'm finding too, this is kind of an aside, but I'm finding that there's a fair amount of drama among them, and it makes sense. I mean, we're all human. We all need each other. We all have really dynamic relationships amongst each other. I just found that really interesting. But they'll, tell each other to go see Allison at the library. And I think that's pretty cool. Kind of a testament to, I guess, the support that I'm able to offer, that I'm worth referring people to.
Let me share just a quick anecdote too. There was one time where Allison was helpful in getting somebody a bus ticket out of town. And I was working at the desk a few days later, and I knew about this because Allison had talked to me about it. And somebody came up to the desk, was asking about the bus ticket program that the library had, which is not a thing. But obviously they had talked to that person, and oh yep, let's get in the bus ticket program. Yeah.
So just a little further about that, and Brian's kind enough to let me spill my own beans. The bus ticket thing was somebody who had come from out of state for a job that didn't actually exist or didn't pan out. It was like a Craigslist scam. So this person became homeless and without a job and without community because she was not from here. and had been sleeping on the streets and in the warming shelter in December. It was cold. And I was on about day 4 of this new job, and it was a completely different like concept to me as a social worker to not like provide us to provide the goods. So I figured out how to track down my supervisor's credit card, and I got her a bus ticket, and I guess I blew a pretty sizable hole in our budget, but I didn't know. And it was only like $200, but I guess our budget's only 1,000. So that was a lot. And it was at the end of the year. And my supervisor okayed it, but she okayed it because it was like things were moving quickly and this person was crying in my office, and it was a Friday evening. So we did it, we made it happen. But then after the fact, she was like, so just so you know, your job is to provide the connection to the services. It's not to provide the service. It's like, oh, forgot about that. But I wasn't going to feel bad about it because the person cried happy tears and she got to go home for Christmas, which was all she wanted. And so it was still a celebratory thing in my book. But then, yeah, like a couple days later, then apparently now we have a bus ticket program and we don't. So word gets around quick when you're overly generous.
So is your job permanent at the library?
No, I wish I could say that it is, but it's grant funded through the end of this year. Anytime I get just a tad nervous and I'm like, so then what after December? Like my supervisor at FSR and people at the library are like, we're gonna figure it out. I'm like, guys, it's July.
No, we know.
But
Yeah.
our fingers are very much crossed that the community will provide in terms of another grant, and or potentially the county just saying, you know what?
This would be a great place to station a social worker as the library. And just to give a little bit more background to this is a pilot program for us. That the grant that we got was a year funding. I won't go into all the details, but and when we first started implementing this too, I did reach out to some of the library systems in Minnesota that had social workers, and a lot of them started in a very similar way, where the first year or two were grant funded, and then only after that were they able to get it into their regular budget or to have an agency come in and take that on. So unfortunately, we're not there as of today, but we would love to keep Allison on for as long as she will have us, but we need to work hard. So if you have influence at the county, Olmsted County, say, oh man, that library, they're just doing great with Allison. So we need to keep on paying her and keep her there as long as we can.
And I want to say too that that's not uncommon. If any of you have a social service background, you know too that that's not uncommon how things work. Like small programs as part of a nonprofit. I mean, Family Service Rochester is very well established in the community and they're excellent at finding grants. But and the library is too. But that's not uncommon how things kind of work. Like funders don't want to fund things blindly. They want to see the data, and you have to do the work to churn the data before you can really prove yourself. So that's kind of like, that's the stage that we're in, and new programs go through this all the time and they establish themselves and it's fine. So it'll happen. I'm very hopeful.
So do you have a certain time that you are at the library, certain days? So if, say, someone comes into our church asking for help, if our church were to know what your schedule is and when you're available, we could send them to
you. Sure could. You sure could. And I would say if somebody is there down in like physically at the church, or they're maybe calling, but they're centrally located and it's easier to get to me at the library, go for it. If they are, if they're able to get to the county building, there's another like 2 of me basically at the county, and there's no like eligibility guidelines really to use either location. It's just what's easiest and what feels right to you. If going to the county feels icky because of the stigma, I get that. It's too bad that that's the case, but that is kind of the way it is. And they're more comfortable coming to me at the library, definitely. If it would be helpful, I could send some of my business cards, which have my hours on them for the office we have.
Yeah, that would be great, because it seems to me like you were saying, they feel safer going to the library and asking for help than going to the county.
Yeah.
And, you know, we do have a little booklet with resources in the community. But again, like you said, some of the people don't follow through on that because it's difficult for them. So if we could refer them to you, that would be great. So if you could send us or bring the cards.
We'll get Carrie to bring some over.
Yeah, sure, that works. Or I could bring them over one afternoon, whatever. I can definitely get you some.
I just wanted to say to like Allison, you talked about being a resource too. I know she met with my technical services department on Friday and we kind of peppered her with questions. But Allison's there, like I've gone in and talked to Allison after interactions I've had with patrons, maybe haven't gone so well. And she can help me talk through the situation and maybe the next time that interaction is gonna go a lot better. Or I'll have a resource that I know I can do. So even though maybe we haven't done a ton of formal training, Allison's really there to help and support the staff too, so we can help better.
Yeah. He's definitely got her back.
What was that, Brian?
Definitely, Allison definitely has our back.
Oh, absolutely. And it feels so mutual.
It's been a great program. I'm really thankful. That's what.
Yeah, same here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and then I believe your hours are too on the website. We'll definitely get started here, but I
Yeah.
think they're on the website.
They are.
Mhm.
And like I said, I work at the library. If anyone has any questions, always feel free to talk about any program or anything. We're really kind of like the Space to Life committee that's trying to do connectedness. The library is there to connect you to resources as well as books and media. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
have a nice day.
Right.
You
Bye.
too. Bye-bye.